Good afternoon, Vijaya, and hello, and welcome to everyone watching.
Hi, Christian. Good afternoon.
Yes, Vijaya, I'm so excited to be chatting with you today. I run a podcast, and I just love talking with other engineering leaders about the challenges we face today. So I'm so happy that we can actually share this live with a bunch of other engineering leaders as well. The topic of the conversation today is going to be on scaling teams and culture, and this is something that you have a tremendous amount of experience with. So with that, let's get started, okay?
Absolutely. Very excited, and thanks for having me here.
Awesome. I think the first thing is, since we're talking about scaling, people always talk about scaling teams, platform, culture, etc. But when we talk about scaling, what does scaling really mean to you, Vijaya?
Yeah, so scaling, simply put, it's about creating multiplier effects, right? And the point of creating these multiplier effects is that if you put marginal effort or incremental effort and in some way cost or effort, whatever it is, you're able to gain big outcomes, big step changes in outcomes and results. Ultimately, that's what we're hoping for, right? How can we do very little and gain a lot? That's all scale is about.
Excellent. Yes. So I think, and related to this, you've helped lots of teams and companies grow rapidly in the past, and from that, you've, I think, formed a framework for helping teams to scale and transition to that. Let's talk about that. And I think you also, there's a graphic that you might have put together to help guide people through that.
Absolutely. Yeah, so as I worked in different organizations and thought about scale a lot, there are so many things you need to do right, and sometimes it can get really overwhelming in terms of what actually needs to happen. So I kind of formed this graphic or this pyramid of scale, as I call it, in my head to help me guide through some of these challenges that we encounter. So simply put, this pyramid has 3 layers, and each layer is focused on a specific aspect of scale. Starting with the bottom layer, which is foundational capabilities. This is anything, from a technology product. Think of this as automation. Think of this as putting in place a great CI/CD platform and framework, or investing in methodologies like Agile or DevOps. These are the types of things at the foundational capabilities layer. Once you put in place, you can get a lot of leverage out of that, and it becomes much more easier to do things in the future. And the middle layer is about scaling teams. This is all about, no organization has infinite resources, no matter how large, and we always have more to do than the resources, right? So how do you kind of set up your team and structure in terms of processes and other things so that, again, you are able to get more out of your team? And in this context, scale is not about increasing the size of the team or growing the size of the team. Sometimes it is, but not always. It's more about how do you get more out of the existing teams and making it much more easy to operate. Sure. And then final piece at the top of the pyramid clearly is the culture, right? So you can have the best teams and best tools, but if you don't have the culture and the teams are not aligned and rowing in the same direction, nothing happens. So that's a simple framework in which I think about scale.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think that's a great framework to put together. And I'd like to go into some of those levels of the pyramid in a little more detail in this conversation. And maybe we can start at the bottom, sort of that appropriately named foundation level. And one of the things you talked about was embracing change and how important that is. So when you talk about that, and as a core foundation level, why is embracing change so important to scale companies, especially as a leader?
Yeah, so we live in a world, Christian, as you know very well. Everything is so rapidly evolving and changing all around us, and we are in the middle of innovation, and things suddenly seem to hit us in all directions, right? So embracing change is all about if there are newer emerging technologies or processes or frameworks or whatever it is that are coming at you, you may not be able to stay current every single time and drop everything else and kind of go to the newest shiny object. But at the same time, we have to strive really deliberately to stay current and stay in lockstep, no more than one generation behind. Otherwise, what happens is all of a sudden, let's say you are still on waterfall and haven't even evolved to agile, and from there, how could you even get into iterative development or DevOps, or every other change after that becomes so hard because all of these things stack up on each other.
Sure.
So the principle here is, stay current, no more than one generation behind, if at all possible, as a code-based kind of principle.
Great. And now the one thing that naturally people ask then, especially with the rapidly increasing pace of change, as a leader, how do you stay up to date? Like, what do you do? Any tips you have to make sure what's the latest thing now or coming in the future?
Yeah, staying a lot of times it's about kind of reading and talking to other leaders like yourself, and staying connected to the communities. I do participate in a lot of public Slack channels and get connected with a lot of colleagues from different industries and different companies in the industry. Attend regularly conferences like this, get to know from each other. Books, magazines, blogs, podcasts, all of the above.
And something too, I think not everybody is on board with change, right? And so it's not just about staying up to date, but it's also about convincing some of your other teams and your leaders that change is important. How do you help guide other leaders to convince them that change is also important?
Yeah, so this is change management. Obviously, is one of the hardest things we all have to do as leaders. Knowing the right answer is not enough, right? How do you bring the teams along, whether it is teams below you or peers or executive team that is above you? That's where we at some point it almost feels like maybe I'm spending all my time doing that more than anything, because it's so hugely important for everything else we do. The best thing I found is not coming across as this is a final change and this is what we're going to be implementing, but slowly and steadily kind of bringing the idea, gathering input at all levels, and including all levels of people as we build the idea, and almost kind of make it a collaborative effort and make it a team's idea or a group's idea. That is what I seem to work best. Definitely at Airbnb and other companies that I've seen.
Sure. No, excellent. Those are great points. And I want to jump to another one you talk about, which is automation.
Mm-hmm.
We always talk about scaling systems, and you want them to grow sublinear or absolutely not like quadratic. But what are some of the more important things to help automated companies at scale, like from a process or thinking? If you come in and go to a company, what are some of the first things you look at to try to help scale that from an automation standpoint?
Yeah, so automation, again, as you said, it takes a lot of shapes and forms. There is definitely a technology level automation, whether it is automating your test frameworks and unit tests and all of that type of thing, which is standard. But also, today, as we are deploying more and more rapidly within cloud, automating the end-to-end deployment pipeline with CI/CD, bringing in tools like Spinnaker or others that would help you automate every step of the way, so that not only the deployment, but rolling back changes if something goes wrong, or doing canary analysis. All of those types of things become very easy and simple to do. But also, shifting gears at a business level. Today, so much happens with data, and data is such a core piece of everything that all businesses are based upon. So leveraging, machine learning and the data that you have to automate as much as possible from a business decisions and the actual technology that you're building, that is another key aspect of that automation. We can also talk about process automation. It's not so much about automation as much as putting a great framework and operating system in place so that teams can much more easily make decisions. Not automated completely. Nobody can automate decisions, but giving enough framework so that it feels like the decisions are being made automatically and easily.
Yeah, that's a good point. Again, I could dive into for half an hour on any of these points we talked about, because there's
Yes.
so important, but I do want to kind of make sure we can get through the different points we have. And if we move up the pyramid now to that middle layer, which you mentioned is scaling teams, if you can just do a recap really quickly, what were the three main points on the scaling teams section?
Yeah, we actually explicitly didn't talk about this upfront, but each of those layers further breaks down into three principles, if you will. At the middle layer of scaling teams, it's about first and foremost establishing a clear operating system, as I was talking about,
Yep.
which is more about, when you scale organizations, oftentimes the confusion is around who makes what kind of decisions, where do we draw the line in terms of empowering and top down and bottoms up, all this type of scenarios, right? So really establishing the why we are doing something, what needs to happen, and then empowering the teams on the how. That's one of the key pillars and key principles there. The second thing I would say is focusing on core mission. What I mean here is that in a technology organization, we often have to make decisions about build versus buy, right? This is a classic problem. I'm sure you have faced yourself multiple times. And then the tendency of the engineering teams and technology teams typically is like, I have the resources, I have the brain power, let me go, build it first, right? And I get, it's good for my career, it's good for me, so let me build it. But the challenge is that if we start building every single thing, then we won't be able to scale, right? It's against the scaling principle. So the principle here is that focus on your core mission, evaluate every single decision from the lens of, is this really core to my mission? And if it is, then build it in-house. But if it's not core to your mission, it's just a means to an end, it is a supporting technology, supporting tool, then it's almost always best to buy, right? And the buy can come in many forms. It could be, buying off the shelf, leveraging open source, or sometimes outsourcing, right? We can work with partners like Lohika and others who have excellent talent that you can work with. And once you build that kind of partnership, you can outsource parts of your stack that are not core to your mission and still focus on your mission with your team and be more strategic about it. And the third principle there is a ruthless prioritization. Everything is about prioritization at the end of the day. As you know, Christian, we talked about this a little bit. The prioritization often is about strategy, and strategy is about what to do, and also equally what not to do. So that all of that plugs into prioritization, and using these three principles, you can scale teams really well.
Yeah, I don't want to get back to, if we were in the audience right now, I'd be asking the question, how many managers right now have had to stop teams from like building it themselves and it already exists? Like everyone is out there, raise your hand. I know I can't see you, but it's something that I, as an engine leader, and most engineers leaders I talk to also run into that. But we can do it better. It'll take a weekend. Why don't we focus on that? Right? But if it's not part of your core value proposition, I think that's kind of really good as you talk about the focus and how that helps. But I do want to go into something you talked about here too, because super important. When you talk about ruthlessly prioritizing, now not just prioritizing, but what's the difference for you between like really truly ruthlessly prioritizing versus just regular prioritizing?
Yeah. When I say ruthless prioritization, what I really mean is that being very disciplined and having the conviction to not do certain things, right? And as we are prioritizing, clearly everything is stack ranked, and let's say you start from the top and start working on things. You have to have the discipline to draw a line somewhere and be comfortable that these items are falling below the line, and we are okay with it, right? That is the part that falls apart in a lot of cases, because the tendency is for everyone wanting to do everything, and when you do everything, you don't do anything really well. And so that's the key there, is just being comfortable, being very explicit about this is what we want to focus on, and this is something we are okay not to prioritize for the time being, for the quarter, for whatever duration it is, and really sticking with it. And part of this is also, for this kind of ruthless prioritization to work correctly, I think what we are prioritizing needs to be comprehensive as well. What I mean is that it's not just customer-facing features or capabilities that you're prioritizing, but you have to take into account all of the technical debt, all of the maintenance work, all of the forward-looking innovation or any type of capability like that. Because at the end of the day, all of those things take resources, right? So if you only prioritize customer facing and everything else is kind of like, scrambling at, to figure out how to get it done, that is not going to help. So putting all of those things through the same funnel and really going and having very strategic conversations about why we are doing this in this quarter and why not, that is what I mean by ruthless prioritization.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's such an important thing. Even, Sheryl Sandberg at Facebook gives a new manager orientation where, she talks about driving that home, where it's not about deciding between the good versus the bad. It's really about deciding which of the good things you're not going to do to focus on the great things, right?
Right.
And you made a really good point around putting everything through a funnel, that you can't prioritize half the work if you still have this other half of the work. Then you're not getting a good picture of all of the things, right? Is there any other framework, any tips that you can help give to managers here to help provide them with a framework for prioritization?
Yeah, so this is what I typically do. I've done in a couple of different companies where, when I start as a new leader in an organization, usually getting a picture about what are the different who are the different stakeholders and what are the different pillars that we need to attend, right? Whether it is like, as I said, there is scope for maintenance, there is tech debt, there is customer facing, maybe there is a customer success team that is coming at you for certain things. There are many various sources that you need to take into account. So just kind of getting an understanding of all of those different sources, and then really creating almost like a stack rank list of 1 to whatever in a way, and having that conversation. And the discipline that is important too, like it gets harder as you have hundreds and hundreds of items, obviously. But figuring out relative to each other what actually is higher and lower, you do that upfront a couple of times, and you will build the muscle, and it becomes easier over a period of time. And then in the long run, actually, it pays off huge dividends, and that really worked for me extremely well.
Awesome, thank you. And I'll say it again. There's so much good information here, so if anyone just takes 1 or 2 pieces of this back that's listening, I think it'll make a big impact on helping you to scale your companies. As we come now to the top of your pyramid, the scaling culture. So 2 things here. One, tell us a little more about the aspects that make up that top piece, but also I'm interested in why you put the culture one at the very top.
Yeah, so that's like the icing on the cake, right? It has to be on the top because ultimately, within product, process, and people, that's another way to think about those 3 layers. People are at the top of everything we do. Unless we have people aligned and people being happy and motivated, nothing else matters. So that's why it's at the top, first of all. And the 3 principles I would say under culture, again, or first is incentivizing ownership for people in terms of driving culture. We can talk about what that means in more detail. Second is focusing on customers. When I say focus, not just focus, but really obsess about customers in many ways. In some cases, the customers could be external. In some cases, the customers could be internal. Either way, it's still a priority. And then last but not least, democratizing communication, because one of the biggest hurdles as you scale teams and scaling culture is how do you get alignment and communication, uniform and smooth communication flow, as well as consistent messaging across the organization is a super important aspect of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to talk about that last point for a moment. I think communication is always important, but now as we're all working distributed, it's even more critical. So
right.
What are some of the tips you have for some leaders today to help with that communication flow in every day, but especially when we're distributed?
Yeah. So the couple challenges, right? One is, teams are distributed, and first of all, everybody is Zoom fatigued and whatnot, and it becomes harder to bring everybody into a large team meeting type of setting and cascade information. That is one way, but that is not sufficient because the people are not able to make all of the meetings, and it's also sometimes information overload. So what I'm trying to see is what's the best way to continue to reiterate some of these messages through various channels. And you have to hear, teams have to hear messages like 3 times, 4 times before it finally sinks in. And so what combination of channels can you use to create that type of flow of information in a smooth and consistent manner? So one thing that I do, for example, is just posting a thought of the day on a Slack channel with the entire team. And it doesn't need to be very long, but a short paragraph or something, but consistently posting something and kind of drawing upon, let's say you hear a piece of feedback from someone and that, hey, this particular piece of information is not very clear to people, and just use that opportunity in real time to clarify that using that mechanism, and it works pretty well. In addition to that, the standard ways of town halls and all hands and all of that are always there. The other thing I would say that worked really well for me is doing kind of small roundtable meetings. This is not the entire team, but like groups of 5 to 8 people in a room. I'm sure many leaders do this. The beauty of that is people that don't open up in larger forums all of a sudden have a forum where they can have the dialogue directly, leads to great discussions, and I love doing those things.
Sure, no, absolutely. And one thing that I get asked a lot too from different people is, how do you know when you've achieved scale? Like, is there an end state there? Like, what do you tell people if they have to do that?
Great question. There are many ways of figuring that out. Some are quantitative, some are qualitative, right? From a quantitative perspective, ultimately, if you see, why are you trying to achieve scale? When we first talked about this, it's about getting larger step changes in outcomes and results for smaller investment, right? So you have to be able to see larger ROI on the dollars that you're investing. That's one way of quantifiably seeing it. And ultimately, at a business level, the unit cost has to go down over a period of time. Because when you first start a business or a company, you're investing in a lot of things, and obviously the cost is high at a unit level. But over a period of time, if you're doing this the right way, that unit cost has to come down. That's a quantifiable. But on a qualitative level, I think there are so many other things, right? You can see the decisions are made very quickly. Teams are aligned and motivated. You don't need to be there on the ground every single day. You actually can afford to take a vacation for a week or two, and things will work smoothly in your absence. So there are many other ways that you can figure out. Like, yep, it feels like things are running like a well-operated, well-oiled machine, and we feel like we have accomplished scale here.
Great. And it keeps going, right? You can keep going up. And
it's never a done deal, right? It's always, there is something to be done, and it's a continuous iteration, absolutely.
Awesome. So I know we have a couple minutes too, and I want to get to some of the questions that we have here from the audience. So I do see one. Let me read this one off now. As you scale, what are some of the common barriers to achieving scale you've seen in the past? And what are the things, and how have you overcome those barriers? Have you been able to get outside resources to help with them, internal to the company, outside of the company? What are the tools you have, right, to help overcome those barriers?
Yeah, absolutely. The barriers to scale, I would say, is that first thing is alignment across the organization. We talked about this a couple of times. Yep. Alignment on strategy, as well as alignment in terms of the principles of how we would actually accomplish something, right? That's an important one. Bringing the team along. One of the tools is principles we talked about is establishing and incentivizing ownership. When we focus on that ownership piece, and if every individual feels like they're an owner of the company, not just an employee, that goes a long way in accomplishing this, right? And then in terms of actual tools there, not just monetary incentives, but rewards and recognition, aligning every thought, word, and action that you take, to reiterate that same message and positive reinforcement of the message that this is how we reward people here, and that goes a long way as well. And in terms of actual other tools, like focusing on core mission, as we talked about, leveraging partners and really being methodical about which work items are things that will be done by your team, which ones are done by somebody else, and leveraging those resources effectively is another important tool. I mean, we can go up, down the pyramid and talk about every one of those in more detail, but I'll let you ask other questions.
Interesting, because it relates back to one of the earlier points we didn't talk about in your framework, which is about using data for decisions. And someone is asking, what about diversity? If AI is amplifying our blind spots with some devastating implications, because decision makers are looking at the same set of backgrounds, don't recognize those gaps, and you're using data. How do you make sure that the data is being used for good and not amplifying sort of the status quo?
Yeah, that is a very difficult problem and challenge. Obviously, all of us are dealing with, and keeping discriminatory ways of looking at and reviewing your models and making sure you remove any bias from the models, and constantly paying attention and getting internal reviews, external reviews as much as possible to eliminate any kind of bias. I mean, these are some things we can try and do, but I agree, this is a complex problem. I wish there was a simple answer. But really, it starts with recognizing this is a problem and doing everything you can. Studying, is there actually bias introduced on your platform? And how can you mitigate some of that once you understand there is any discrimination or bias?
Okay, great. We have another one from Sai, I believe, here as well. What framework do you use for prioritization at Airbnb? Is it durable, or do you deploy different frameworks for specific products or contexts? Answer as much as you feel okay with sharing there.
Yeah. I'll also more generally to say that, in larger companies, anywhere that I've been, usually there is not a single framework that works for all teams and all organizations. It is pretty custom depending on the specific problem space and what works for the team, right? So it's very local. Like I said, I've tried a couple of different frameworks. One is what I call the business prioritization list, which is like strict stack ranking, including a comprehensive list of sources and things. There are other ways of doing that in different models as well. But again, there's no one answer that fits everyone. It depends on the need specifically. But the principle is still the same, right? You are still trying to accomplish the same thing, no matter what the tool or the specifics.
Okay, good. I think we have time for one more here. Angie asks, in our productivity-oriented culture, in such fast-paced environments, how do you foster healthier work-life balance so we can attract and retain great talent?
Yeah, so I think this is why I keep talking about ruthless prioritization and focusing on core mission as a couple of my principles. What happens if you don't follow those is exactly what you're talking about. People get burnt out, and there is a tendency for wanting to do everything. And pet projects sometimes cause a lot of angst, right? Again, Christian, as you were saying, this only takes over the weekend. I can squeeze this in, and there was your weekend. You don't want to end up in that situation. So leveraging these type of frameworks and really partnering with leadership to, first of all, communicate very openly if this is what is happening. It's a very acceptable thing to talk about it, especially today's environment when everyone is burnt out and they have 100 things they need to juggle, what's going on in the world versus families and work and lots of things. So feel free, and everyone should feel free to talk about it explicitly with their leadership and really bring some, get some help in where it is needed.
Awesome. So we're kind of running out of time. I do want to thank Plato for organizing and Lohika for sponsoring this session. And Vijaya, super thankful for your time today. This was such an incredible session. And I know everybody watching is going to be able to take home some of these tips, apply them, and really help them on their journey to scale. So it was great to have a conversation with you. I'd love to deep dive with you on some of these things in more detail, actually offline too. But thank you very much.
Thank you so much again, Plato, Lohika. Thanks for the opportunity. Christian, you've been such a great host. I really enjoyed talking to you today, and hopefully this was helpful to everyone.
All right. Thank you.
Take care.